Good morning. It's like being a rock star, you know, to stand on the podium and to see so many people. Let's those who are just coming in to sit. Okay, don't do it too close. I didn't shape my hair this morning. So, good morning. I just read this morning that the Syrians announced that they need between $250 to $400 billion to reconstruct Syria. I don't know where the money will come from. Probably Iran. Maybe China will step in, and other countries, but this is not the issue. The issue is what happened in the Middle East since 2010. Because Syria is an example, radical example, of the results of what was kind of a hope in 2010, that the Middle East is going through a process like the Europe in the 19th century that might lead to a different, better Middle East. You know that President Peres, alav shalom, spoke about the new Middle East. He had in mind more open, more democratic, more cooperative, more technological Middle East. What we see today, after the period of few years, which at the beginning people thought that this is the Arab Spring, something totally different. For sure, it was not a spring. That for sure. But still, the name is there, and in a way, it's a very cynical name. Because the Middle East today is not more democratic, no more open, all these good hopes that so many people had about the Middle East at the beginning of the process of these revolutions. And the question is, why? What happened? What made the Middle East as it is today? And are we in a better position to see a real different, better Middle East in the future? If we look at the Middle East, you see three main issues which underline the friction in the Middle East. The reasons why the Middle East is so volatile and it's not ended yet. The first one began in '79 with the revolution in Iran, which made Iran a different state, led by clerics with a vision about changing the Middle East and the relation between Shiites and Sunnis. Shiites are only little minority in the Middle East. Only 15% of the Muslims in the Middle East are Shiites. They always, or almost always, had been oppressed by the Sunnis, by the majority, almost 85%. And the vision of the leaders in Tehran after the revolution was, we should export the revolution and change the relations between the Shiites and the Sunnis. And since then, the Iranians are the active force in the Middle East. They are pushing everywhere. They are pushing in Yemen. They pushed in Bahrain. The Saudis came with military forces to save Bahrain. They pushed in Lebanon. They pushed in Syria. They are pushing now in Iraq. From their point of view, what King Abdullah of Jordan called the Shiite crescent is the dream about situation totally different than had been in the Middle East before the revolution, in which the Shiites will be dominate force in the Middle East. It is going together with dream about the Farsi empire and the religious issue between the Shiites and the Sunnis and so on and so forth. But at the end, it's a combination of a state, Iran, of a religion, the Shiites, and a dream about changing the rules of the Middle East because they don't want the Western rules to be those who dominate the Middle East. But this is a very important factor to understand. The Iranians are pushing everywhere, by the way, including through Sunni movements. For example, in Gaza, they established the Islamic Jihad, which is a totally Sunni organization, financed by Iran, established by Iran, commanded by Iran. It's easy to say about Hezbollah, which is a Shiite organization, which is an extension of Iran. The most successful example of export of the revolution is Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is a source of warriors which helping the Iranians all over. You can see Hezbollah members fighting in Iraq, you can see them fighting in Yemen, and there are more than rumors that they are now helping Maduro in Venezuela. Because this is the interest of Iran. So this is one very important factor. Wherever there are Shiites and Sunnis, or Sunnis who are ready to accept the help of Iran, you'll see the Iranian hands in the kitchen, doing whatever they think is relevant to their interest. The second issue in the Arab world is the fight within the religion or within the systems about the spirit of the future of the Middle East. The slogan of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was organized first time in Egypt in the 20s, previous century, is Islam wal hal. Islam is the solution. Since then, you can see movement within Islam, either it is Shiites or Sunnis like Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram here in Africa, ISIS in Iraq, Syria, and now in the Sinai Peninsula, that believe that Islam is the solution. They are ready to kill each other about the question, which Islam, but fundamentally they believe that Islam is the solution. And this is a fight within the states between modernity and those who seek to go back to the time of Prophet Muhammad. And what ISIS did is to impose the old rules of the 7th century in the 21st century. This is why it was so aggressive and frightening. Because it's totally different rules about women, about wars, about punishment, about everything. But this is inside the Arab society. It's very clear, for example, in Egypt, in which the army, the legal system, the university stood against the Muslim Brotherhood. It was either of the Muslim Brotherhood versus the deep state, the modern institutions of the state versus Muslim Brotherhood. And Muslim Brotherhood was very strong in Syria, very strong in Jordan, and other Salafi movements like or different from Muslim Brotherhood, but with the same idea that Islam is the solution, of course, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others, including here in Africa, it's called Boko Haram. Boko Haram means the holy book, which is the Quran. Going back to the holy book. So within the society, even not connected to the Shiites, there is a struggle about what should be in the future. The third element which made the Middle East of today is all over the Middle East, from Gibraltar to India. This functioning of the governments. The other day I met a scholar from Kuwait in London, and we discussed the Middle East from his point of view on one side and the Israeli point of view. And I asked him, what brought the wave which was called later on the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia, in North Africa, moved into Libya, then to Egypt, then to Syria, was contained by the rulers of the Gulf, began, by the way, in 2009 in Iran, didn't succeed. And he said, look, General, we understood that we're doomed to live in dictatorships. We will not be democracies. We understood it. We even understand that as citizens of the Middle East, we will not be in the same position, the same standard of living, and so on and so forth, like the European countries. But when it was understood that we don't have a hope that the next generation, our sons and grandsons, our daughters and granddaughters, will be in the same position, will not have employment. The unemployment rate in many Arab countries is around 40–50%. Graduates of universities, half of them do not have jobs. And that the rulers don't see as their obligation towards us to provide us with the hope for the future, when it was understood that we are losing our dignity as human beings, that was the basis for the wave of explosion all over the Middle East. It could contain in the Gulf countries because they have enough money to pay the people. But in other countries in which there was not such a capability to bribe the people, the street emerged and said, enough is enough. Even in countries in which the rulers succeeded to contain the wave, the street is very strong and they cannot be ignored. And it is very important later on when I speak with our relations with the Arab world. Someone called it streetocratia. Like democratia, it's not democratia, it's streetocratia. The street is very strong. When the Arab world faced these three phenomena, they didn't know what to do. As I said, in the Gulf they bribed the people. In other places they changed something in the system. By the way, pay attention, not even one king was toppled during this wave, and it is about legitimacy of governments versus kingdoms. At the same time that happened, something happened outside the Middle East, external to the Middle East. And this is the decision of the Americans to pull out from the Middle East. Many reasons, I'll speak about it at 2 o'clock. But the fact is very clear. The Americans are determined to invest less and less in the Middle East, to pull out their forces. The American umbrella, which was a very important factor in the stabilization of the Middle East, is disappearing. And the Arab countries ask themselves a question: whom we can trust, who can help us to deal with both, with threats which are coming from the Shiite side, from Iran, and from threats which are coming from within the Arab states, like ISIS. Who can do the job for us? And they don't have a good answer. Because unlike the Shiite side, in which the leadership is very clear, the leadership are the Iranians sitting in Tehran and making decisions for Shiites all over the Middle East. They are consulting with others and so on, but at the end of the day, what Hezbollah will do in Lebanon is mostly depends on the decisions in Tehran. They have some flexibility within Lebanon, of course, but for big issues, approval should come from Tehran. The Sunnis don't have such a leadership. In the past, it was clear that the biggest Arab country, Egypt, is the leadership of the Arab Sunni world. And when Sadat signed an agreement with Israel and the Arab countries cut the relations with Egypt, he said, don't worry, at the end, they need us, they will come back. And that's what happened a few years later. Today, Egypt cannot be the leader of the Arab states because beggars cannot be leaders. And Egypt needs the economic help of the Gulf countries. And they have to make many changes, structural changes in Egypt to save the economy of Egypt. It is true they found gas, and that will be very, very crucial issue for the future of the economy of Egypt, but still, Egypt cannot be as a beggar, as one who needs money from other countries to survive, cannot be a leader. I'm not sure that General Assisi wants to be a leader, by the way, of the Arab world. So many problems and so few benefits that I'm not sure that he wants to be. But anyhow, the Sunnis do not have a leader. Saudi Arabia cannot be accepted by the Arab world as a leading state, with all the problems of a state which is run by a family. So the Sunnis do not have a leadership. And they ask themselves, okay, who can help us to contain Iran? Who can help us to fight ISIS? And when they look around without the American umbrella around, surprisingly, they find that there is a place in which they can find stability, strength, and determination. And it is the State of Israel. And for these countries, the relations with Israel are kind of a substitute to the American umbrella. It's not the same. We should not lie to ourselves. It is not the same. But it's a compensation, a little compensation, but still more than nothing. And from time to time, you see something going out about that. When the Egyptians admitted that they are fighting with the Israelis, ISIS in Sinai, it's a huge historical move that the Sunni Arab state is saying clearly and loudly, yes, we are fighting together against another Arab Muslim movement. And they don't hesitate to say it in the television. The other day, I met Turki al-Faisal, who was the head of the Saudi intelligence and their ambassador in London and Washington, in Washington Institute for an open discussion. It was in the internet in real time, so every Saudi could open it and see what is said. And he was, I must say, very, very convincing in his words about the need of the Arab world to change the relations with Israel. He said cynically something like, General, remember, with your money in our mind, we can change the Middle East. But there is a very strong truth behind it. With what Israel have, what we have in Israel, technology, knowledge, know-how regarding agriculture, water, health, all these areas that still are very weak in the Middle East and needed to be dealt with can be done much easier with Israeli skills than in any other corporations that the Arabs can think about. When Egypt needs to fight ISIS, they know that in Israel we have the know-how how to do it. And the same is about other Arab countries. Yes, it is true that in a way, ironically, they became trapped by their own propaganda. After 70 years during which they preached to their own people that Israel is source of evilness, that Israel is the bad part of the Middle East, that we are oppressing the Palestinians, and so on and so forth. Today, it's not easy to move to the other side. And here, why it is very important to understand that the street is very strong. Even in those dictatorship, they cannot ignore the street feelings, sentiment. It's not about logic. And this is why for them it is so important to solve the Palestinian-Israeli issue, because this is the barrier between those relations under the table with all the problems and those relations on the table that can change the Middle East, as was said by Tariq al-Faisal. And yes, many of these elements of relations are under the table. As a friend of mine is saying, the Middle East is very crowded under the table. It is crowded because we understand their limitations. They are ready to cooperate with them and to help them in those areas that they need. And we understand that why they cannot do it on the table. So if you look now at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you understand that there is another dimension that was not so strong in previous years. It is now important to serve the Arab interest more than to serve the Israeli interest. We have our own issue. There is a huge argument inside Israel: should we control the West Bank with 2 million Palestinians, or we will give it up because we don't want to absorb into Israel another 2 million Palestinians? And it is not finished yet. But there is another dimension that should be taken into consideration. That now this is the main barrier between the relations that we have today with the Arab states and something different that can be much, much better and more helpful to the Middle East as a whole and to the State of Israel, relating to our relations with the Sunni Arab states. Some people call them moderate states. None of them is moderate. But the Sunni Arab states, which needs Israel today, not because of the Arab-Palestinian, but the Israeli-Palestinian issue, because versus Iran, versus ISIS or other threats from within. And some of them understand it is not only to deal with the threats, it's also a chance to build another Middle East, to help them to overcome the problems that they are facing relating to water, agriculture, health, and so on and so forth. That's what Turki al-Faisal had in mind when he spoke about their money in our mind. So the Middle East of today is one of the most volatile places in the world. The Middle East today is not at the end of the wave that began in 2010. The Middle East of today is facing many, many problems. The most less problematic for the whole Middle East is the Israeli-Palestinian issue. There is no any influence of this problem on the whole Middle East. None. Maybe something in Jordan. But outside of Jordan, believe me, the Arabs will accept any agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, even it will be a poem of O. Henry and with the signature of Abu Mazen under it. They don't care what will be in the agreement. What they need is a signature of the Palestinians, that this is not anymore a problem between the Arab world and Israel, because they need Israel. So what we are facing now, We are facing a volatile Middle East that is not going to end. We are facing a Middle East in which Arab Sunni countries are ready to cooperate with Israel, and we are facing a very aggressive state called Iran. What is our policy regarding to this? First, we decided, and we are very determined to continue to stop the Iranians from building an independent war machine in Syria, on top of what they have in Lebanon. In Lebanon, they have an organization, an NGO, military NGO, with 130,000 rockets and missiles. Think about the number. 130,000 rockets and missiles. What they try to do now is to raise the number of missiles that will be precise missiles, can hit any target inside Israel. What they want to have is another independent war machine in Syria, which will be controlled directly by the Iranians. And what we try to do is to destroy any attempt by the Iranians to build this war machine in Syria. And we try to stop any transfer of technology to enhance these rockets and missiles which are in Lebanon today by making them much more precise. So if you read about strikes of Israel in Syria, it either we are bombing transport of weapon system or kits which are going to enhance the weapon system of the Iranians, or attempt by the Iranians to build an independent war machine in Syria. We have to be very, very, very cautious in our actions, because in Syria today, it's not just the regime, it's not just Assad, it is Assad backed by the Russians. And we should be very cautious not to hit any target which is related to the Russians, and of course not to hurt any Russian soldiers. By the way, we are very determined not to destroy the Syrian regime. It's not our business to determine who will be the king of destroyed Syria. If it will be Assad or someone else, we decided not to interfere in this argument. Someone else will have to work to find who will rule Syria. But whenever the Syrians are using their air defense to attack our aeroplanes, we don't hesitate. And we have a very smart hotline with the Russians, in which the name is very clear. It's not cooperation, it's not coordination, it's deconfliction, to prevent any mistake that will hurt us or them. That's all. It's not more than that, but it's not less than that, and it is very important. The Americans are asking why you are so cooperative with the Russians, why the Prime Minister which met Putin more than any other politician in the world is Prime Minister Netanyahu. Why these warm relations with the Russians? And the answer is, we cannot ignore the Russians in Syria. It is like the weather. It is a fact on the ground that should be taken into consideration whenever we act in Syria. We cannot make the decision for the world if the Russians will stay in Syria, will not stay in Syria. It's too big on us. What we have to do is to take into our calculation the fact that the Russians are there. A little state like Israel cannot ignore the fact that 150 kilometers north of Israel, there is a huge base of Russians, and the Russians are very active in Syria. This is why it is so important to continue the dialogue between the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Russia. This is why it is so important to keep the line between us and the military forces of the Russians in Syria open all the time, so that we can be sure that the deconfliction process is very, very clear to both sides, to prevent mistakes. It's not a question about we like Putin, we don't like Putin. It's not our business. Our business is to take care for the Israeli interest, and if for that we have to meet and to have a very open dialogue with the Russians, we will do it. We did it in the past, we are doing it in the present, and we will do it in the future. It's important to the security of Israel. It's not a question if we like what Putin is doing in Russia or in Ukraine, and so on and so forth. With all due respect, it's not our business. This is about one area called Syria. Much more delicate issue is Lebanon, because the status quo in Lebanon is clear. We are not operating in Lebanon, and they are not operating against us. If they want to operate against Israel, they have to go to Syria, and through Syria they can try, and up till now we succeeded to kill almost all those who try to act against Israel through the Syrian border. But the threat is there. And the fact that a few months ago we actively neutralized the tunnels of Hezbollah is very significant. What was behind it? Leave alone the question how it was identified. Israel maybe is the only state which has the technology to identify tunnels. What was behind it? Why it was so important? And by the way, there was an argument between the professionals in Israel: should it be done now, or we have to wait? And I think that strategically the decision postpone any attempt by the other side to ignite a war against Israel. Why? The tunnels were a secret card that Hezbollah and the Iranians have, and they thought that because Israel doesn't have a clue idea about it, that will be the big surprise of the next operation, during which Israel finds itself fighting inside Israel when the Israeli forces should fight in South Lebanon. And they could bring them to the conclusion that they have enough capabilities to surprise Israel and to win the war against Israel, and that might push them for another war against Israel. The fact that Israel acted prevented it from being another tool in their hands, saying to them, we know about you more than you think, and we will not hesitate to act when it will be needed. The fact that they don't have this secret card anymore in their hands, they have to think twice before they will make any decision about escalation. And it is very important because at the same time that we are very active in Syria, openly, it was very important to tell them in Lebanon, in which they have the capabilities, be careful, we know more than you think that we know about you. And without the secret strong card, they will probably more hesitate to go for any escalation because of what we are doing on the other side in Syria. So in a way, strategically, it was very much connected to what we are doing in Syria. It gave us more freedom to act in the future when the other side knows that he is losing, that he lost his secret card. The other issue, which is still very important from our point of view, is the issue of nuclear Iran. How far the Iranians are ready to go with their nuclear dream during the agreement and after the agreement. Because at the end, after 10 years, between 10 and 15 years, depends in which areas, the Iranians are not having any obligations based on the agreement that they signed with the Americans and the other five. In that area, Israel is very clear. We will not let the Iranians to have nuclear military capability, point. How, when, what should be done before and what should be done after, we are arguing between ourselves. But the net result is very clear. By the way, it agreed by all the partners to the government in the future, that Iran should not be a nuclear superpower. And we have to prepare ourselves to a situation in which they will try to be. By the way, according to the agreement, based on the agreement, they can continue, A, to continue the process of research and development of the new generation of centrifuges, which will be 20 times stronger and faster than the previous generation. And within the agreement, they can continue to enhance their long-range missiles systems, to test it and everything. The agreements didn't apply to this issue of long-range missiles. And that's what the Iranians are doing. And ask yourself a question. Why the Iranians are investing in long-range missiles? What they have in mind when they speak about 2,000, 3,000 kilometer range of long-range missiles. At the beginning, it was very clear. When the Iranians came to the North Korean and asked for missiles, and the North Koreans said, we have on the shelf, you can take as many as you want, missiles for the range of 1,000 kilometers. The Iranians came back after 2 days and said, not enough. If it is not 1,300, we don't buy it. And we ran to the maps to see what is the 300 kilometer, and it was very clear. From Israel into the border of Iran, it's 1,200 kilometers. From the eastern side of Israel to the western side of Iran, 1,200 kilometers. So it was understood why they need another extra 300 kilometers. But today they are speaking about 2,000 kilometers and 3,000 kilometers. What they have in mind? Europe? Other countries? So this is an issue that Israel will have to deal with in the future, whatever will be the government in Israel, is how to prevent Iran from being nuclear. The fourth issue is ISIS. Yes, as it was said, we are fighting ISIS whenever ISIS is going close to the Israeli borders. It was true about the Golan Heights, and it's true about the Sinai Peninsula. We will not let ISIS to dominate, to control an area close to Israel, which allows the organization to launch rockets or to send people into Israel. We are lucky we made the fence along the Egyptian border. It was the Prime Minister's decision, by the way, against all the professionals. They didn't thought that it is important fence, but he decided, and we have a very sophisticated fence today along the border with Egypt, which is not easy to infiltrate into Israel from the Sinai Peninsula. They can launch rockets and missiles, of course, but to infiltrate into Israel, it's very problematic. It's possible, but very remote. But we are determined. ISIS will not build any base close to Israel. We will destroy any attempt by ISIS to do it, because we understand the consequences in the future if these organizations succeed to build bases around the state of Israel. And at the end, the Palestinian issue. The Palestinian issue is on the table. The Americans are preparing the deal of the century. I know that it is a 50 pages plan which is supposed to lead to negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, with the Arab countries involved in the process, and to bring in the end an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians, and the Arab world will be part of the deal. How it will work, with whom it will work, very good questions that no one but the little group of Americans who are preparing it, no one has a good answer for. It will be postponed because Israel is facing elections in the 9th of April, and maybe not less important, we expect to land on the moon in the 11th of April, to be, by the way, the fourth state in the world. The Americans did it, the Chinese did it, the Russians did it, India prepared their plan for next few months, and look at the 4 countries: United States of America, Russia, China, India, in the middle, little Israel, with the help of God, will be the 4th state to land on the moon. If you want to ask yourself how we are succeeding, this is the secret. The name of this vehicle is Bereshit, Genesis. The offer in Israel is to change it to chutzpah. Thank you very much.